I welcome you all to the closing panel of this historic conference that has brought people together from many different parts of the world. I am speaking to you from the cathedral in Skálholt. For almost 1,000 years, the center of Icelandic Christianity has been not only vibrant, but also visionary. And for us in this country, Skálholt is not only a natural treasure, but also a holy place. Not just because of its position within the Icelandic Church and the history of our people, but also because of the demonstration of the beauty of our planet in the neighborhood of the cathedral. We are close to some of the most majestic glaciers in Europe. Hekla, probably the most famous, together with Vesuvius volcano in Europe, is also close by, as well as the majestic rivers and the lakes, as well as the fields that stretch long into the neighborhood in the Icelandic countryside. One of the reasons why the early bishops decided to live here in harmony with nature and also to utilize the fruits of nature in order to survive in this harsh country for such a long time. So I cannot really think of a more proper place to chair this final panel than from the cathedral here in Skálholt and from the center of the planetary beauty and also the creative forces of our planet that we are constantly reminded of when we gather for services in this great church. We have a big panel today. There are 9 distinguished panelists that come from many different parts of the world. So I will have to be a tough taskmaster to make you all stay within the time limit that has been allocated to you. We will deal with 3 fundamental themes or questions, as you might call them. For the first one, each of you has 3 minutes for your answer. I don't call it a statement, I call it an answer. And then for the other 2 questions, each of you has 2 minutes. And if you forget yourself in the fascination of your argument and the presentation, I hope you excuse me for actually breaking in and reminding you that your time for that particular segment is actually up. So let us start with the Minister of the Environment in Iceland, Guðbrandur Ingi Guðbrandsson, and he will lead on the first question, which deals with the role of ethics and spirituality in sustaining our planet and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So, Minister, the global floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, and a very good day to all of you. I think this first question is really a good one because it sort of comes to the basics, if I can put it that way. And indeed, I think that sometimes we are really afraid of invoke morals and beliefs in political discourse. For example, when you discuss these issues in international arena, it's usually based on economics or other important technical issues, which sometimes are those that is much more easier to deal with when you are working with texts of agreements and likewise. Now we have to take into account, of course, that it happens so that a strong economic argument is indeed present for environmental protection and sustainable development. And I myself, coming from an NGO, environmental NGO, have used a strong economic message, for example, when trying to convince people that protected areas, for example, is a good way of managing our resources, and pointing out that it actually has an economic angle to it, that it's actually can actually result in economic growth to protect nature. We know that all here that we have reached a stage where our actions are really threatening the life support systems of Earth and of humankind. We are entering the 6th great species extinction event. I could continue like this for probably my whole 3 minutes, but that's not what I'm going to do, because this is something that you are all aware of. The sad part is perhaps that the conditions of our Earth, which has big fever, in my opinion, is that this is no science fiction. This is really the truth, the projections of science, our best experts. So we can ask the question, can we really go about business as usual, knowing that it may lead to, we could call it a vicious spiral of destruction for coming generations and for life on Earth? And my answer is clearly no. And therefore we need to mobilize all actors and institutions to move away from the path of what we could sometimes call greed and waste, and work for sustainable development and environmental protection. And that is there where I think that the role of the faith community comes in, because people listen to faith leaders. At its heart, the question of environmental protection and sustainability is about morals, ethics, and values. And I think that will be my final words for this first section. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for staying almost exactly on the time limit. Cardinal Turkson, thank you very much for being with us. We have been honored to welcome you in our country when we launched the Arctic Circle Assembly 7 years ago. And to have you participating here today on behalf of the Holy See is, of course, a great honor. So, please. Yes, the floor is yours.
Is it Cardinal Turkson?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I didn't hear you.
Yeah,
so thank you, Honourable Minister. I think talking about spiritual values, we need to recognize that spirituality is the source of a lot of value systems in several cultures. And when the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, was introducing the SDGs, he presented them as human dignity narrative that leaves nobody behind. And when it comes to talking about the dignity of people, this is one of the basic affirmations of several religious faiths. With the Christian religion, this is the affirmation in scriptures of the fact that the human person was created in the image and likeness of God. This affirms the basic fundamental dignity of every human person. And the SDGs intend to develop this of every person. So the 17 goals are very many ways of helping people realize and living their dignity in full. And so capturing it, part of the realization of this dignity would invite us all to recognize the value systems that we all have, and would also help us to recognize the ethical conditions, because then ethics gets understood as our responsibility towards making everybody realize their dignity. So the two would go hand in hand. So the basic affirmation of the dignity of people binds religious groups with the SDG goals. And we all are aiming at the same realization of the human person's dignity And then the ethical consideration help us to appreciate the responsibility that we have in developing the dignity and supporting the development of dignity of one another. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And if I can now invite Director Noronha to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. I am in India, so it's evening for me. And I'm delighted and honored to be here this afternoon with all of you. And I'd very much like to take off from where the Cardinal just finished talking about dignity and the very importance of leaving no one behind and the whole issue of moral responsibility, because that's exactly where the SDGs are located. And that's exactly where the moral crisis is today, because we can see this in the multiple crises that we face, from the 3 planetary crises that we keep talking about: climate change, biodiversity losses, pollution. But what is really underlying all of it is unsustainable consumption and production. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where we need to look at where is it that we have a duty of care towards the other, the vulnerable other. We see more and more evidence of the unsupportable consumption and production patterns that we have, that we really need to revisit from a moral and ethical point of view if we really were to consider that we should leave no one behind, or we should also think in terms of how do we make this planet fit for future generations as well as current generations. That is the real big responsibility that we have today. And unless we revisit our consumption and production, we will not be able to do this. Why do I say consumption and production? Because this is SDG 12. UNEP is very intimately connected with this, so I feel very passionate about this, but also because I believe that this single SDG, if we were to pay a lot of attention to it, it would respond to a lot of the other SDGs, because it speaks to a caring for the other, duty of care that we keep talking about, is there when we start looking at our consumption patterns and our production patterns. Because whether we look at it from the consumption side, where we are over-consuming and therefore not leaving enough for the other, or under-consuming and therefore not being, to the levels that we have to in terms of human flourishing, we have an issue here. Now, every UN document that you look at speaks to responsibility in a big way, whether it's the Stockholm Declaration of 1972, the Rio Declaration of 1992, the World Sustainable Summit. All of these speak to responsibility. But we need to unpack that, and we need to take that forward in terms of our collective responsibility. And I believe if we look at the collective responsibility in terms of consumption and production, and the value systems embedded in making consumption and production more attuned to the other, to the vulnerable other, and COVID is a very good example of how our unsustainable consumption and production patterns have led us to where we are, we would be very, very different in the world to come. 3 points here, and I will stop, Your Excellency. One is that the science is telling us very clearly that it's this unsustainable consumption and production that's leading to inequality, that is leading to the situation we are in terms of the planetary crisis. We also know very clearly that if we want to address SDG 12, we have to reset our ethical principles in order to look at the other in a different way from the way we've been looking at today. And that there are various... Okay, I'm done. That there are various human, there are various economic systems in the world, including Gandhi's trusteeship concept, that speaks very clearly to this issue. I will stop there. I can come back later. Thank you.